To the channel of my colleague Agnes Thompson, and my name is Marta. I will share my story with you. Subscribe to us.
My name is Martha Johnson, and at 72 years old, I honestly believed I had seen the full spectrum of human behavior. Decades spent as a nurse had exposed me to raw, unfiltered humanity, the fragility of life, the unexpected strength of the human spirit, the quiet dignity in suffering, and, yes, the astonishing depths of selfishness. I prided myself on my ability to observe, to listen, to decipher the unsaid, and to understand the true motivations behind people's actions. I was convinced. I knew my own daughter, Sarah, better than anyone. I knew her quirks, her passions, her little habits. I knew the warmth of her smile, the sound of her laughter. I knew the daughter I had raised, the child I had nurtured with every ounce of my being. How profoundly, devastatingly mistaken I was. The betrayal, when it arrived, felt like a physical blow, a stunning, cold slap that echoed the very worst moments I had witnessed in hospital corridors, moments where hope vanished and harsh reality took its brutal hold. It was a Tuesday, a day so perfectly sunny it felt almost sacrilegious for it to be tainted by such ugliness. The morning sun, a gentle caress on my skin, bathed my small garden in a golden light. I was out among my roses, their petals still dewy from the night, their perfume a heady, intoxicating embrace. Each bloom was a testament to patience and care, much like the life I had meticulously built for myself. Every carefully trimmed branch, every perfectly turned clump of soil, a reflection of the order and purpose I had always sought. My little house, a quaint cottage with a wraparound porch, painted a soft sage green, was more than just bricks and mortar. It was my sanctuary, my quiet haven where every chipped teacup, a relic from my grandmother's kitchen, every worn book, its pages softened by countless readings, every faded photograph, capturing moments of simpler joy, held a cherished memory, a whisper of a life well lived, independent and, I thought, secure. The thought of a fresh cup of chamomile tea, brewed from the herbs I grew myself, its warmth a familiar comfort, was a comforting promise, a perfect end to a perfect morning. Then, the mail arrived, not with the usual gentle thump through the slot, but with a sharp, unwelcome rustle as I pulled it from the box. Among the usual stack of junk mail and utility bills, there it was, a thick, official-looking envelope, emblazoned with a stern legal seal, its crisp edges feeling sharp against my fingertips. My hand, still damp from watering the roses, hesitated, a premonition, cold and swift, washing over me. There was an unsettling weight to it, an ominous presence that seemed to absorb the sunshine around me, casting a sudden, chilling shadow on my tranquil afternoon. I opened it carefully, my fingers surprisingly clumsy, a faint sense of dread beginning to prickle at the back of my neck. Then the words swam before my eyes, sharp and accusatory, cutting through the serene afternoon like shards of glass. A harsh, shattering sound that only I could hear. It stated, in cold, impersonal legal jargon, that my daughter, Sarah Johnson, was initiating legal proceedings against me. The reason? Emotional distress and financial abandonment. The phrases mocked me with their blatant untruth. She claimed that my refusal to financially assist her on a monthly basis had caused her irreparable harm, had plunged her into a state of unimaginable suffering. She was demanding $5,000 a month. $5,000 a month. I reread the sentence again and again, my mind struggling to bridge the chasm between the words on the page and the reality of my relationship with Sarah. Trying to make sense of it, a knot tightened in my throat, hot and painful. My hands, which just moments ago had tenderly touched rose petals, now trembled uncontrollably, crumpling the paper. The scent of the roses now seemed cloyingly sweet, suffocating. Sarah, my only child, my flesh and blood, was suing me. The very idea was preposterous, unbelievable, a grotesque distortion of our shared history, a bad dream from which I longed to awaken. I had raised her with an unwavering love, A devotion that knew no bounds, sacrificed countless hours, endless sleepless nights rocking her back to sleep, and much of my hard-earned money to give her every opportunity. I had paid for her college education, a degree in some amorphous field that promised little practical application, even though she barely scraped by, always complaining about the rigor, the unfairness of professors, the general burden of having to apply herself. Her transcripts were a testament to her minimal effort, a stark contrast to the sacrifices I made to fund her studies. I had helped her with the down payment on her first apartment, a rather lavish one for a recent graduate, complete with a rooftop terrace she rarely used and a gourmet kitchen she never cooked in. I had bought her a reliable, if not flashy, car when she started her first real job, a job she'd quit within a year because it didn't spark joy, as she'd put it, a phrase that now tasted like ash in my mouth. Reflecting a shallow understanding of responsibility and commitment, my generosity had always come with quiet caveats, gentle suggestions for responsibility, for self-reliance, principles I had lived by my entire life. Lessons I had hoped, prayed, she would internalize, but those suggestions had clearly fallen on deaf ears, or perhaps she had simply chosen to ignore them, believing my resources to be endless, my patience limitless, my love unconditional to the point of blind indulgence. Over the past few years, Sarah's requests for money had become more frequent, more demanding, growing in audacity with each passing month. Initially, they were framed as emergencies, a sudden car repair that cost more than the car itself, an unexpected medical bill for some vague ailment, a friend's destination wedding in some exotic locale she simply had to attend. Each time, I would sigh, pull from my modest savings, which I had carefully built for my own declining years, and transfer the funds, always with a nagging feeling that I was enabling something unhealthy, fostering a dependency that would eventually consume us both. Then the requests shifted. They became less about emergencies and more about lifestyle. A new designer handbag that cost more than my monthly groceries, a weekend getaway to a spa resort, a non-refundable deposit for a trendy, exclusive fitness class she attended twice. I had tried to explain, gently at first, my voice laced with a weary patience, that my pension was finite, that my savings were for my own future, my own unexpected needs, that I couldn't just endlessly replenish her spending habits, that my well of funds, unlike her desires, was not bottomless. "Mom, it's just a little bit," she'd whine over the phone, her voice laced with an injured tone, as if I were personally depriving her of oxygen. "You have plenty. You're not spending it on anything important." Important to her, important meant catering to her every whim, indulging every fleeting desire. To me, important meant security, dignity, the ability to care for myself without becoming a burden to anyone, especially not to her. The thought of losing my independence, of becoming reliant on the very child who now sought to exploit me, sent a shiver of dread down my spine. The final straw had come just a few months ago, a conversation that ended not with a bang, but with a sickening thud. She called me, her voice dripping with indignation, demanding $5,000 for a new, supposedly essential, home renovation, a wellness sanctuary, as she called it, a dedicated room for yoga and meditation in her already spacious suburban home, a place of peace, she claimed, that she simply could not live without. I had listened, my patience, usually so resilient, wearing thin, fraying at the edges, and finally, I'd said no, a firm, unequivocal no, for the first time in a very long time, my resolve hardening with each of her increasingly unreasonable demands. Her reaction had been explosive. A torrent of accusations about my alleged stinginess, my lack of support, how I was ruining her life by not indulging her latest fantasy, how I was a selfish, unfeeling mother. Her words, sharp and venomous, pierced through me, striking at the very core of my being. She'd hung up on me, the line dead, leaving behind a ringing silence that felt heavier than any noise, and for weeks there had been silence, an unusual, unsettling silence that I had mistakenly interpreted as a sign of her reflection. Her perhaps finally understanding, or at least accepting, my boundaries. Foolish, naive Martha, to hope for such a thing. But no, this letter, this legal document, cold and formal, was her response. Her ultimate act of entitlement and emotional blackmail. She wasn't just asking for money anymore. She was demanding it. Through the cold, impartial hand of the law, my quiet, ordered world, built on principles of hard work and self-reliance, of simple dignity and earned peace, was suddenly turned upside down. Filled with a sickening mix of disbelief, hurt, and a growing, unfamiliar anger that tightened my jaw and straightened my spine. I sat there on my porch swing, the crumpled letter clutched in my hand, watching the shadows lengthen across my garden. The beautiful roses now seemed to mock me, their serene beauty a stark contrast to the turmoil churning within my chest. How could she do this? How could my own daughter, the child I had brought into this world, the person I had loved unconditionally, turn so viciously against me? It wasn't just the money, though $5,000 a month was an astronomical sum for me, a retired nurse living on a modest pension, a sum that would quickly deplete everything I had worked for. It was the audacity, the breathtaking betrayal, the complete disregard for our relationship, for my feelings, for everything I had ever done for her. She wasn't just demanding cash, she was demanding my independence, my peace of mind. She was demanding that I subsidize her extravagant lifestyle. Until I had nothing left, becoming her personal ATM, her seemingly bottomless pit of desires. The legal language of the document, sterile and detached, only magnified the personal affront, emotional distress, it read. As if I were the one who had caused her trauma, as if her disappointment at not getting what she wanted was equivalent to a genuine injury. My own heart ached with a trauma far more real, the shattering of a lifelong dream of a loving, respectful family. A quiet, peaceful old age. My first instinct, the one that screamed loudest in my head, was to call her, to demand an explanation, to plead, to cry, to somehow make her see the monumental error of her ways, to shake her until she understood the gravity of her actions. But decades of nursing had taught me the value of a calm mind in a crisis. Impulsive reactions often lead to deeper wounds, to irreparable damage. I took a deep, shaky breath, then another, trying to steady my racing pulse, to calm the chaotic storm within my chest. I folded the letter carefully, smoothing out the creases, and placed it on the small table beside me. It was real, undeniably real, and it demanded a thoughtful response, not an emotional outburst. I knew I needed professional help, a lawyer. But the very thought sent a wave of anxiety through me. I had always handled my own affairs, paid my bills on time, managed my finances meticulously. The legal world was a labyrinth I knew nothing about, a place for disputes and conflicts that I had always carefully avoided, yet now I was being dragged into it by my own blood, by the very person I had always striven to protect, to cherish. I spent the rest of the evening in a haze, the scent of dinner cooking, usually a comforting ritual, filling my small home with warmth and promise, now felt oppressive, heavy. I barely touched my food, my appetite vanished, my mind racing. Dissecting every interaction I'd ever had with Sarah, trying to pinpoint where I had gone wrong, where the seeds of this monstrous entitlement had been sown. Had I given her too much? Not enough? Had my love been smothering, or perhaps too distant, too preoccupied with my work? These self-recriminations swirled in my head, a painful, endless loop, a cruel torment that offered no answers. By the time darkness fell, cloaking my little house in its comforting embrace, a veil drawn against the harshness of the world, I had made a decision. A firm, unshakable resolution that settled deep in my bones. I would not let Sarah do this. I would not become a victim. I would fight, not out of malice or revenge, though a flicker of cold anger certainly existed, but out of a fierce need to protect what was mine, my dignity, my financial security, my future, and perhaps, just perhaps, to teach Sarah a lesson she desperately needed to learn, a lesson about responsibility, about gratitude, about the true meaning of family, about the difference between wants and needs, between love and exploitation. The thought, however small, gave me a sliver of strength enough to pull myself from the porch swing and head inside, to turn on the lights and face the unwelcome reality. But the quiet peace of my home felt fragile now, threatened by the storm brewing on the horizon. The legal battle initiated by my own daughter. I knew the path ahead would be fraught with pain, with difficult revelations, but I also knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I could not, would not, back down. Not from this, not from Sarah. The next morning, armed with a strong cup of coffee, its bitterness a welcome jolt, and a determination that surprised even myself, I began to make calls, my fingers, usually so steady, fumbling slightly with the phone. I consulted a trusted friend, a retired school principal named Eleanor, who had always possessed a keen, practical mind and an impressive network of contacts. Eleanor listened patiently, her usually cheerful face growing solemn as I recounted Sarah's lawsuit, her quiet empathy a comfort in my turmoil. She didn't offer platitudes or easy answers, no empty words of "it will all be fine." Instead, she gave me exactly what I needed. A name, Arthur Jenkins, she said, her voice firm and reassuring. He's a family law attorney. Specializes in elder rights, a good man, very sharp, and he doesn't take nonsense from anyone. He's a bulldog when he needs to be, but always with integrity. The referral was a lifeline, a tangible first step in what felt like an impossible journey. A path through an unknown, intimidating wilderness. I thanked her profusely, her calm assurance already bringing a modicum of relief, a small lessening of the crushing weight on my chest. Scheduling an appointment with Mr. Jenkins was less daunting than I had imagined. His secretary was polite and efficient, her voice professional and calming, and within 2 days, I found myself sitting across a polished mahogany desk in a tastefully decorated office, a quiet space with muted tones and framed legal diplomas, facing a man who looked exactly like what a good lawyer should look like, kind eyes that held a surprising depth, a thoughtful, intelligent expression, and an air of quiet competence that immediately inspired trust. Arthur Jenkins listened to my story with an unwavering gaze, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad, his pen scratching softly against the paper, the only sound in the otherwise silent room. I laid out everything, Sarah's escalating demands, my attempts to set boundaries, the specific details of the lawsuit, the audacious, emotional distress claim, the astronomical sum she was demanding, laying bare the raw, painful truth of my family's disintegration. As I spoke, the initial shame I felt, the embarrassment of having my family's dysfunction laid bare for a stranger, slowly began to recede, replaced by a growing sense of righteous indignation, a slow, burning fire in my belly. This wasn't just about my personal pain. It was about a deeply unfair and predatory act, a clear attempt at elder exploitation. When I finished, Mr. Jenkins leaned back in his chair, a slight frown creasing his brow, his fingers steepled thoughtfully. "Mrs. Johnson," he began, his voice calm and measured, his tone reassuring. "I won't lie. These cases can be difficult, especially when they involve family. They're messy, emotionally charged, and often drag out, but let me assure you, you have a very strong case here. Sarah's claims of emotional distress due to a refusal of financial support are tenuous at best, frivolous even, in the eyes of the law, unless there's a pre-existing agreement or a clear demonstration of dependency that you are obligated to maintain, which, from what you've told me, there isn't." His words were a balm, the first real glimmer of hope I had felt since opening that awful letter, a ray of sunshine breaking through the clouds. He explained the process, the discovery phase, the possibility of mediation, an attempt to resolve things outside of court, and then, if necessary, the court hearing, the full public showdown. He assured me that he would protect my assets, my home, and my peace of mind. "We will fight this, Mrs. Johnson," he concluded, his voice firm, unwavering, "and we will win." His confidence was contagious, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of my old self returning, the resilient, no-nonsense Martha who had handled countless emergencies in the ER, who had always known how to stay calm under pressure. How to Lead with Quiet Authority. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and legal jargon, a constant stream of documents and requests. Mr. Jenkins's office requested years of my financial records, bank statements, pension details. Everything that could prove my financial independence and Sarah's lack of legitimate claim. It was tedious, intrusive, forcing me to revisit every expenditure, every saving, every carefully made decision, but necessary. I meticulously gathered every document, every scrap of paper, feeling a strange mix of dread and determination, a perverse satisfaction in proving my careful stewardship. Sarah, through her own lawyer, continued to push, her demands for information equally relentless. Though theirs felt more like fishing expeditions, grasping at straws, trying to find anything at all, that could bolster her flimsy case. Her lawyer, a sharp, aggressive young man named Mr. Thompson, sent a series of increasingly condescending letters, implying that I was an uncaring parent, that I was hoarding my wealth while my daughter suffered, that I was somehow morally culpable for her choices. Each letter was a fresh stab, a calculated attempt to wear down my resolve. But Mr. Jenkins had warned me about such tactics. "They're trying to intimidate you, Mrs. Johnson," he'd said, his voice level. "Don't let them. Focus on the facts, on the truth. That's your shield and your sword." His guidance was invaluable, a steady hand in the storm, a rock in the turbulent sea of legal maneuvering. During this period, Sarah herself remained silent, the direct line of communication between us severed, replaced by the formal, cold exchange of legal documents. It was a strange, painful silence, a void where once there had been family holidays, shared laughter over birthday cakes, and casual chats about daily life. I missed the daughter I thought I knew, the one who would bring me flowers from her garden or share stories of her day, the bright-eyed girl who would run to me for comfort. This new Sarah, the litigious, demanding stranger, was a bitter pill to swallow, a constant reminder of how far we had fallen. Yet, with each passing day, as I worked with Mr. Jenkins, meticulously piecing together my defense, my sadness began to transform, slowly, into something else, a quiet, burning resolve, a steely determination that settled deep in my core. This wasn't just about my money anymore. It was about defining boundaries, about protecting the dignity of my remaining years, about standing up to entitlement and greed. It was about proving that love, even a mother's love, has limits when it's abused, when it's treated as a bottomless resource to be drained without thought or gratitude. I understood now that this legal battle was a necessary, albeit painful, amputation, a severing of a toxic limb that threatened to poison my entire being, to consume my peace and ruin my golden years. I would emerge from this, not unscathed, for some wounds never truly heal, but certainly stronger and whole. The court date loomed, a daunting milestone, a final confrontation, but I felt a growing sense of readiness, an almost quiet anticipation, ready to face my daughter and the truth head-on, in the unblinking gaze of the law. The day of the court hearing arrived shrouded in a thick, unseasonable fog, matching the churning apprehension in my stomach. The air outside my window was heavy, damp, mirroring the weight that had settled over my heart. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple, dignified navy suit that had always made me feel composed, regardless of the chaos around me, a silent armor against the emotional onslaught I knew was coming. Mr. Jenkins met me in the courthouse lobby, his presence a steadying anchor. In the swirling anxiety, his quiet confidence was a balm. He reiterated our strategy, reminding me to stick to the facts, to remain calm, and to trust the process. "Remember, Mrs. Johnson," he said, his voice low, a reassuring murmur against the muffled hubbub of the courthouse. "This isn't about emotion. It's about the law, and the law, in your case, is on your side." His words resonated, pulling me back from the brink of emotional collapse, reminding me of the inherent strength I had cultivated over a lifetime of dealing with crises, both medical, where life and death hung in the balance, and personal, where difficult decisions were often the only way forward. Stepping into the courtroom felt surreal, a stark, antiseptic space where personal drama was distilled into legal arguments, cold, hard facts, and dry procedural steps. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pallid glow that seemed to strip color from everything. Sarah was already there, seated at the opposing table with her lawyer, Mr. Thompson. She looked different, sharper, her usual soft features hardened by an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Was it anger, defiance, or something else entirely, perhaps a desperate hope that this would all magically work out in her favor? Our eyes met for a fleeting second, and in that brief moment, I saw a flicker of something that might have been pain, or perhaps just cold calculation, a momentary crack in her hardened exterior before she quickly reasserted her resolve. Then her gaze hardened, and she turned away, as if I were a stranger, a casual acquaintance, not her mother, the woman who had brought her into this world, nurtured her, sacrificed for her. A profound ache settled in my chest, deeper than any legal dispute could inflict, a maternal wound that would likely never truly heal. Mr. Thompson, her lawyer, was a caricature of aggressive youth, all slicked back hair and a condescending smirk, a cheap suit and an air of practiced superiority. He gave me a brief, dismissive nod, as if acknowledging a minor nuisance. Not a legitimate opponent, a woman to be easily dismissed. I returned his glance with a steely resolve, my gaze unwavering, reminding myself that I was Martha Johnson, a woman who had seen grown men cry and broken bones set, who had delivered babies and comforted the dying, a woman who had faced far greater challenges than a puffed-up young lawyer and a misguided daughter, a woman who would not be easily intimidated. The proceedings began, a tedious ballet of legal formalities, initial statements, and presentation of documents, each word carefully chosen, each gesture precisely timed. Mr. Thompson opened for Sarah, his voice dripping with theatrical pathos, painting a picture of my daughter as a vulnerable, emotionally scarred woman, suffering immensely from my alleged abandonment. His narrative was a work of fiction. Full of dramatic flourishes and selective truths, he detailed Sarah's current financial woes, her burgeoning debts, her struggle to maintain the lifestyle she felt she deserved, a lifestyle that, from my perspective, was entirely self-inflicted and far beyond her means, fueled by impulse and a profound lack of foresight. He spoke of my supposed vast wealth, exaggerating my modest savings into a veritable fortune, a bottomless pit of cash, implying that I was heartlessly withholding funds that were rightfully hers, that I was a cruel, miserly matriarch, depriving my struggling child. His performance was compelling, I'll give him that. For a moment, I almost believed his version of events, that I was indeed the cruel, miserly mother he was portraying, a villain in my own daughter's twisted tale. But then I looked at Mr. Jenkins, who sat calmly, occasionally making notes, his expression unperturbed, his quiet confidence reassuring. He seemed to be waiting, observing, letting them exhaust themselves with their theatrics, confident in the strength of our actual case, the truth. When it was Mr. Jenkins's turn, his approach was remarkably different, a stark contrast to the histrionics we had just witnessed. He didn't grandstand. He didn't resort to emotional appeals. His voice remained even, his posture unyielding. Instead, he presented facts, simple, undeniable facts, laid out with surgical precision. He detailed my meticulously managed finances, my modest pension, the responsible way I had saved for my retirement, every penny accounted for, every investment carefully considered. He showed documented evidence of every significant financial gift I had ever given Sarah, the college tuition, the apartment down payment, the car, each presented with dates and amounts, demonstrating a pattern of generous, but not limitless, support, a mother's genuine love expressed through sacrifice. He then systematically dismantled Sarah's claims of emotional distress, asking for specific, documented instances of how my refusal to fund her wellness sanctuary had led to such severe trauma that it warranted a $5,000 a month payment. He pointed out the frivolous nature of her demands, juxtaposing them with my own carefully planned, self-sufficient life, a life built on solid ground, not shifting sands of desire. His quiet, methodical presentation was far more devastating than any shouting match. It highlighted the sheer absurdity of Sarah's claims, painting her not as a victim, but as a deeply entitled individual, a person who confused wants with needs and entitlement with rights. Then came the cross-examinations, and this is where Mr. Jenkins truly shined, his legal acumen coming to the forefront. When Sarah took the stand, her initial confidence seemed to waver under his calm, piercing questions he didn't accuse. He simply asked, gently at first, about her employment history, her education, her career aspirations, then subtly transitioned to her spending habits, about her perception of financial responsibility. "Ms. Johnson," he asked, his voice even, devoid of any judgment, merely seeking clarification, "can you explain to the court why, despite receiving a substantial inheritance from your grandmother, a sum of approximately $75,000, you are now in such dire financial straits, claiming an inability to support yourself?" Sarah stammered, visibly flustered, her eyes darting nervously, trying to deflect, to blame the economy or unexpected expenses or even the cost of living. But Mr. Jenkins pressed on, his questions like a surgeon's scalpel, carefully dissecting her flimsy narrative, leaving no room for evasion. He brought up a luxury vacation she had recently taken to the Caribbean, documented with a dizzying array of social media posts she herself had shared, displaying opulent meals, private beaches, and expensive excursions, and asked how that aligned with her claims of destitution and emotional trauma from my alleged neglect. Each question chipped away at her carefully constructed facade, revealing the cracks beneath, exposing the hollowness of her claims. I watched her, my heart a complex mix of sorrow and a strange, detached curiosity. This wasn't the Sarah I knew, or rather, it was the Sarah I knew, stripped bare of the veneer of charm and victimhood she usually wore, exposed for what she truly was. It was then, during Mr. Jenkins's relentless but professional questioning of Sarah, that I saw it, the flicker of doubt in the judge's eyes, a slight furrow in his brow that indicated he was seeing through the charade. The carefully woven web of lies and half-truths. Sarah, cornered, desperate, resorted to blaming me, her voice rising, losing its composure. "My mother always made me feel guilty for wanting things. She was always so careful, so frugal. It made me feel like I was never good enough, that I was a burden. She never understood what it was like to truly live." Her words, intended to evoke sympathy, instead sounded petulant, childish, and strangely accusatory, as if my responsible financial habits, my prudent life choices, were a personal attack on her very being. A deliberate attempt to stifle her joy. It was a desperate attempt to shift blame, to weaponize her own inadequacies against me, to paint me as the villain she needed me to be. Mr. Jenkins merely let her words hang in the air, allowing their inherent unreasonableness to speak for themselves. To condemn her with her own voice, the courtroom was silent, save for the scratching of the court reporter's pen, the tension palpable, the air thick with unspoken judgments, a collective understanding of the true nature of the plaintiff's case. As the proceedings wore on, the pinch of retribution began to take shape, subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, weaving itself into the fabric of the testimony. Mr. Jenkins introduced further evidence of Sarah's significant spending habits, not just the luxury vacation, but extravagant purchases of designer clothes, high-end electronics, frequent, lavish dinners at exclusive restaurants, all meticulously documented from her own credit card statements and bank records, which, through legal discovery, he had obtained and methodically organized. He didn't need to make a grand speech. The sheer volume and frivolous nature of her expenditures spoke volumes, especially when contrasted with her claims of needing $5,000 a month from her elderly mother to cope with emotional distress caused by my supposed lack of support. It painted a picture of unbridled self-indulgence, a stark contrast to the image of a suffering victim she tried to project. The judge's expression grew increasingly stern, his gaze fixed on the financial printouts, his eyes scanning the endless rows of high-priced transactions. Sarah's face, which had been pale with anger, now began to drain of color, turning an ashen gray as each new piece of evidence was presented, each revelation a fresh blow to her credibility, to her entire fabricated story. The climax of this phase, the mid-story turn, came not with a bang, but with a quiet, devastating question from the judge himself, a moment that distilled all the preceding hours of testimony into a single, piercing query. It was after Mr. Jenkins had finished his cross-examination, and Mr. Thompson, looking increasingly despondent, his shoulders slumped in defeat, had no further questions for his own client, the judge, a man with a kind but discerning face, a lifetime of observing human folly, etched into his features, leaned forward, his voice calm, but with an underlying current of steel that cut through the silence. He looked directly at Sarah, who was trying desperately to regain some semblance of composure, her eyes starting nervously. "Ms. Johnson," he began, "the court has reviewed your claims of emotional distress, and we have heard testimony regarding your financial circumstances, including significant expenditures on luxury items and experiences." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly, a clear signal that he saw through her facade. "Can you explain to this court, under oath, why your current financial difficulties, which appear to stem primarily from your own discretionary spending, and not from any neglect on your mother's part, are the legal responsibility of your mother, Mrs. Martha Johnson, especially given her consistent, documented history of substantial financial support throughout your adult life, and her own prudent, limited income?" Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out, only a small, choked sound, a desperate gasp for air. She visibly blanched, her complexion turning a shade of stark white that made her look truly ill. Her eyes darted from the judge to Mr. Thompson, who looked away, offering no help, no solace, then to me, a desperate, almost pleading glance that lasted only a second before shame, or perhaps fury at being exposed, overtook it. The question hung in the air, heavy and inescapable, a mirror, reflecting her own profound lack of accountability. It wasn't a trick question, it was a fundamental question of accountability, of personal responsibility, and Sarah, for all her bluster and entitlement, had no answer, no logical, legal, or even morally defensible explanation. She had built her entire case on a foundation of emotional manipulation and perceived entitlement, and the judge's simple, direct question had just exposed the rotten core of it all. Her carefully constructed narrative of victimhood crumbled before our eyes, leaving her speechless, exposed, and utterly defeated. In that moment, the courtroom remained in stunned silence, the air thick with the unspoken truth, the truth that everyone, including Sarah, now had to confront. The momentum had irrevocably shifted, the battle was far from over, but the tides had turned, and the clear direction of justice had been revealed. My heart, which had been clenched for weeks, burdened by worry and grief, began to slowly, cautiously unfurl, a delicate bloom in the harsh light of the courtroom. The judge's question, stark and unanswerable, hung heavy in the air, a silent condemnation that resonated louder than any shouted accusation, its weight pressing down on Sarah, crushing her carefully constructed illusion. Sarah, usually so quick with a retort or an excuse, so adept at deflecting blame, was utterly mute, her face a mask of shock and dawning, painful realization. She looked as though she had been physically struck. The carefully constructed edifice of her self-pity and entitlement crumbling around her like a sandcastle in a rising tide. Her lawyer, Mr. Thompson, shifted uncomfortably, his previous swagger entirely gone, replaced by a defeated slump. He knew, as did everyone in that courtroom, that the game was up, the charade over. The truth, stripped bare of its embellishments, stood undeniable and ugly, a brutal testament to Sarah's greed and lack of empathy. The very foundation of Sarah's lawsuit had been exposed as nothing more than an audacious demand for unending financial support, disguised as a plea for justice, a cynical manipulation of the legal system, and for the first time, I felt not just anger or hurt, but a profound sadness for her, a deep, maternal sorrow for the path she had chosen, for the person she had become, so lost in her own self-serving narrative that she couldn't see the harm she inflicted, or the love she had so carelessly discarded, the precious bond she had shattered. The judge, a man of quiet authority, his gaze unwavering, allowed the silence to stretch, letting the weight of his questions settle upon Sarah and upon the entire courtroom, a moment of profound contemplation. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he picked up his gavel, the small sound echoing with an ominous finality, a drumbeat of truth. Given the evidence presented, he began, his voice calm but firm, resonant with the gravity of his pronouncement and the testimony heard. It is clear to this court that the plaintiff, Ms. Sarah Johnson, has failed to demonstrate any legitimate basis for her claim of emotional distress or financial abandonment by the defendant, Mrs. Martha Johnson. On the contrary, the defendant has provided ample and consistent documentation of her lifelong financial prudence and her considerable, sustained support for the plaintiff throughout her adult life, including significant contributions to her education and housing, demonstrating a pattern of commendable maternal generosity, not neglect. It is the court's finding that the plaintiff's demands are without merit, lacking both legal standing and factual support, and appear to be an egregious attempt to exploit the defendant's generosity and age for personal gain, a clear case of elder financial abuse, albeit non-physical. His words, precise and cutting, sliced through the air like a sharp blade, each one a direct hit, a confirmation of everything Mr. Jenkins and I had worked so hard to prove. Sarah's face, already pale, now flushed crimson, then white again. Her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and utter humiliation, her jaw slack. She cast a frantic, desperate glance at Mr. Thompson, who simply offered a defeated shrug, his own professional standing likely diminished by this debacle. The stark reality of the legal defeat settling upon them both, the bitter taste of consequence. The judge continued, therefore, this court rules in favor of the defendant, Mrs. Martha Johnson. The plaintiff's claim for $5,000 per month is hereby dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. Furthermore, given the frivolous nature of this lawsuit and the undue emotional and financial burden it has placed upon the defendant, retired individual of advanced age, the court orders the plaintiff, Ms. Sarah Johnson, to bear all court costs and the reasonable legal fees incurred by Mrs. Martha Johnson, to be determined by a separate hearing if an agreement cannot be reached between the parties within 30 days. The gavel came down with a sharp, decisive thwack, a sound that reverberated through the courtroom, sealing Sarah's fate and validating mine. The sound echoed, a clear, unmistakable declaration of justice served, of right prevailing over wrong. Sarah gasped. A small, choked sound, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes fixed on the judge. Then slowly, almost unwillingly, she turned to me, her face a contorted mask of shock and something that looked eerily like genuine sorrow, a brief, fleeting moment of true vulnerability. For a fleeting moment, I almost reached out to her, the maternal instinct to comfort, to soothe, to mend the broken pieces, rising unbidden, a primal urge to embrace my child. But then I remembered the past months. The cold legal documents, the callous accusations, the deliberate attempt to strip me of my security and dignity, to leave me vulnerable and dependent, and my hand remained firmly in my lap. My resolve hardened, the moment of weakness passed, replaced by a quiet, resolute strength, a newfound certainty in my own boundaries. The courtroom began to stir, whispers rippling through the benches, a collective murmur of surprise and satisfaction. But I remained still, absorbing the full weight of the judge's decision. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was a profound affirmation of my life, my values, and my resilience. It was a testament to the wisdom that comes from years of hard work, self-reliance, and facing adversity head-on. The judge's ruling subtly but powerfully demonstrated the significance of my unwavering Principles, showing how my refusal to be manipulated, my determination to protect my hard-earned resources, my refusal to succumb to emotional blackmail, had not only saved me from financial ruin but had also exposed the insidious nature of entitlement, the destructive power of unchecked greed. It sent a clear message that kindness is not weakness, that generosity is not an endless wellspring to be exploited, and that respect, particularly for one's elders, is not a suggestion but a fundamental pillar of human decency, a cornerstone of a healthy society. As the judge concluded the session and rose, Mr. Jenkins turned to me, a warm, satisfied smile on his face, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Congratulations, Mrs. Johnson," he said, his voice quiet but full of admiration. "You stood your ground. And justice prevailed. You showed remarkable courage." I nodded, a small, grateful smile touching my lips. "Thank you, Arthur," I replied, my voice a little shaky, still tinged with the emotion of the moment. "I couldn't have done it without you. You were truly exceptional." He was more than just a lawyer. He was a steadfast ally, a beacon of integrity in a confusing, painful ordeal, a true advocate for the vulnerable. Sarah, meanwhile, had slumped in her chair, her shoulders hunched, her head bowed. Mr. Thompson was speaking to her in a low, urgent tone, his words lost to me, but she seemed oblivious, lost in her own personal collapse. Her once proud demeanor replaced by a shell-shocked stillness, the bitter taste of defeat, a raw, public humiliation. Leaving the courtroom, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, certainly, a profound sense of vindication, a weight lifted from my shoulders, but also a lingering sadness, the kind that settles deep in your bones, knowing that something precious, irreplaceable, had been irrevocably broken. My relationship with my daughter, as I had once known it, was shattered beyond repair, a ghost of what it once was. There was no triumphant gloating, no desire for further revenge, only a quiet resolve to move forward, to rebuild my peace, to reclaim the sanctuary of my life, the quiet solitude of my home and garden. As I walked out, I saw Sarah and Mr. Thompson still huddled inside, a stark tableau of defeat, of a lesson learned too late. I didn't look back, my gaze fixed on the bright, albeit still foggy, day outside, a new beginning, a clearer path. In the weeks and months that followed, life slowly began to resume its gentle rhythm, like a river finding its course after a turbulent storm. The legal fees for Mr. Jenkins were substantial, a significant sum. But the judge's order meant Sarah was responsible for them, which was a small, satisfying vindication in itself, a tangible consequence for her actions. The process of collecting those fees was another tedious, unpleasant negotiation between lawyers. But it was handled entirely by Mr. Jenkins's office, sparing me further direct contact with Sarah or her lawyer, sparing me further emotional pain. I replaced the anxiety of legal battles with the soothing routine of my garden, the rhythmic turn of the soil, the comforting weight of a good book in my hands, its pages whispering stories of worlds far removed from my own, the quiet joy of a cup of tea on my porch, watching the birds flit among the branches. My roses bloomed with renewed vigor, their colors more vibrant, their perfume sweeter, as if sensing the lightness that had returned to my spirit, a silent celebration of resilience. I reconnected with old friends, spending hours reminiscing and laughing, volunteered more time at the local community center, sharing my nursing experience and offering comfort to others, and rediscovered simple pleasures that had been overshadowed by the legal storm, small acts of kindness and connection that reminded me of the true richness of life. I never heard directly from Sarah again, not an apology, not a plea, not even a Christmas card. The silence was absolute, and in a way, it was its own form of resolution, a painful but necessary severing of ties that had become toxic. A cauterization of a festering wound. Occasionally, I would see glimpses of her life through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances, always filtered, always vague, whispers carried on the wind. I heard she had struggled financially after the lawsuit, that her wellness sanctuary had remained unfinished. a monument to her unfulfilled desires, that her lifestyle choices had finally caught up with her, leaving her adrift in a sea of debt. I felt no joy in this, no schadenfreude, no desire for her suffering. Just a quiet confirmation that actions have consequences, that entitlement ultimately consumes itself, leaving an empty husk, and that the world, unlike a loving mother's purse, does not offer endless bailouts for poor choices. It demands accountability, it demands effort, it demands responsibility. The story of Martha Johnson and the lawsuit became a quiet legend among my small circle of friends and within Mr. Jenkins's office, a testament to resilience, to the wisdom of elders, and to standing firm in the face of injustice. It was a painful chapter, yes, a scar on the landscape of my life, but it was also a defining one. It taught me, even at my age, that personal strength is found not just in enduring, but in actively fighting for what is right, for your own dignity and peace. It solidified my belief that true wealth lies not in material possessions, in designer bags or exotic vacations, but in integrity, self-respect, and the quiet dignity of an independent life, a life lived with purpose and principle. I had not only protected my assets and my peace of mind, but I had also, in a way, reaffirmed the profound value of those intangible qualities that money can never buy, leaving a legacy not of grudges, but of quiet triumph, of a spirit unbroken, of a life lived on its own terms, a life truly free. The sun, finally breaking through the lingering fog, its golden rays illuminating my garden, warmed my face, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my heart, that I was precisely where I was meant to be, at peace and finally, truly home. Surrounded by the quiet beauty of a life reclaimed, a spirit undiminished.